Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Out in the dark void, the only visible light came from the softly glowing damaged fan. On the main square of the fan, the air rippled and distorted, whereupon Bai Xiaochun appeared, ridiculously fat because of all of the life force he had absorbed. From a distance, he looked like a trundling sphere of flesh. I need to assimilate this life force as quickly as possible. I'm way too fat. Yet again, he tried as hard as he could to look down at his feet, but all he could see was his belly. In fact, he was so fat that it was actually difficult for him to touch his belly with his hands. It was all very uncomfortable. Eyes flashing with determination, he flew toward the fan ribs to start challenging the next level. He had benefited from the events in Merc-9 County in a very unique way. Normally speaking, going from the early celestial realm to the mid-celestial realm was a very difficult process that would take an extended period of time. It would also usually require vast amounts of precious materials and good fortune. But now, he was filled with an astounding level of life force, and although he couldn't be sure of exactly how far it would take him, he needed to give it a shot. He would only have one shot, and if he didn't take advantage of it properly, it was impossible to say when the next chance would come along. Before getting this life force, his plan had been to use the rewards given by the fan to propel him along in his cultivation. But after recent developments, he changed his mind. My only chance is to go all out. I'll get as far as I can in the levels, and then try to break through. Gritting his teeth, he stepped into the next level. He failed levels numerous times but didn't give up. He would analyze the reasons for his failures, perform tests, and then continue challenging the levels. Roughly 2 months flew by, during which time he would frequently go back to Misty Sea Prefecture to make sure nothing unexpected had occurred. The Saint Emperor and Vile Emperor had long since learned of the events in Merc-9 County, but neither of them did anything about it. Bai Xiaochun continued to worry about the matter, but reminded himself that although Misty Sea Prefecture was important to him, all of the territories in the second immortal domain were of importance to the two emperors. And thus, Bai Xiaochun continued to pass one level after another. Eventually he passed the 50th level. Finally, at the 51st level, he reached a limit, and was unable to pass the level no matter what he did. He performed a few more tests before giving up on the 51st level. Whatever. I guess I can only pass the 50th level in my current state. At this point, he assessed all of the rewards he had earned, and was very impressed, especially by the reward from the 50th level. There were many medicinal pills that he didn't recognize, but could identify as immortal pills thanks to his skill in the Tao of medicine. There was also a bamboo slip which was carved with 2 magical symbols. Although he didn't understand what they meant, when he looked closely at the first magical symbol, he felt like he was descending into depths of hell. It was as if his mind filled with nothing but death. After a moment passed, he recovered. Panting, he didn't dare to look at the second magical symbol. However, he already had an idea about what this bamboo slip was. The reward for the 50th level is a portion of the Tao essence of life and death. Gripping the bamboo slip tightly in his hand, he sat down in the main square of the fan to meditate. Previously, it had always been an easy thing to meditate, but now that he was extremely fat, it was difficult to settle down cross-legged. Somehow, he managed. Quickly performing a double-handed incantation gesture, he rotated his cultivation base and began to work on the first level of the time immemorial codex, the former will. His energy passageways instantly began to vibrate as cultivation base power surged into them. The power converged on the main energy passageway within him, and then ended up in his heart. During this process, his mind began to thrum, building up into a roar that made it seem like a huge dragon was inside of him. The dragon surged with explosive power in his heart, and occasionally in his Dantian region. Of course, Bai Xiaochun knew that this supposed dragon was actually his Daoseed, which was different from that of other celestials. His Daoseed was full and complete, and was becoming more powerful with every advancement he made with his cultivation base. Unfortunately, he was still very far away from a breakthrough. In the celestial realm, the Daoseed first lays roots, then sprouts, then blossoms and bears fruit. Upon becoming a celestial, the Daoseed takes shape. The energy passageways in the body become like rootlets. Only after they integrate do they become the root. In the early celestial realm, the rootlets spread and eventually become the root. In the mid-celestial realm, the root is given nutrients, and the Daoseed sprouts. That is exactly what is happening now. His eyes flickered as the dragon that was his Daoseed finally began to center on one location, his Dantian region. As it shrank down, a strange energy coursed through him, which was apparently the power caused by his Daoseed sprouting. Shivering, he realized that the critical moment had arrived, and that the life force which had been locked away inside of him for the past months was now about to be released. Rumbling sounds like heavenly thunder filled him as the vast stores of life force surged out. As he worked with the former will of his time immemorial codex, the life force rushed unimpeded toward his Daoseed. His Daoseed began to tremble with incredible intensity, like parched earth that had suddenly encountered sweet dew, or a starving person who came across a feast set for immortals. It became a black hole that ravenously devoured all of the life force that came its way. As it shrank down on itself with greater speed, Bai Xiaochun slowly began to deflate. At the same time, the aura of his Daoseed grew stronger and stronger. Apparently, a dramatic metamorphosis was taking place. However, it was at this point that something which Bai Xiaochun had been worried about all along happened. His Daoseed was based on the Undying Live Forever technique, which was different from the legacy magics of the two imperial clans. What was unique about the Undying Live Forever technique was the drastic levels of life force it required. In fact, even with the enormous amount of life force he currently had at his disposal, it seemed unlikely that he had enough life force to cause his Daoseed to fully sprout. He had already shrunk down to his original size and shape, and was still shrinking. It was as if his own life force, cultivation base and everything else of which he was made, were being absorbed into the Daoseed. And if it kept going in this way, he would be destroyed in body and soul before the Daoseed sprouted. Even worse, he could not attempt to interrupt this breakthrough process, or reverse it. Now that he had started down this path, he had to succeed. Thankfully, Bai Xiaochun had anticipated something like this happening. Although he had never made an attempt to achieve a breakthrough in the celestial realm, nor had he been given any advice about it, based on what he knew about the Undying Live Forever technique, and his past experiences, he had guessed that he might reach a critical point in the process in which he ran out of resources. Having prepared for this possibility, he wasn't alarmed. As his body continued to shrink in on itself, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a medicinal pill, numerous immortal grasses, and other rewards he had acquired from the first 50 levels of the damaged fan. He had given some of the rewards to the Grand Heaven Master and others among his subordinates, but he had kept many for himself, and right now, he threw them all into his mouth without hesitation. The pills and grasses immediately caused life force to flow into him, halting any withering process. As for the Daoseed, it was already very close to completion, and therefore, after enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, it began to shine with radiant light. The light filled him, and then spread out, creating something that surpassed the brightness of the damaged fan itself. From a distance, Bai Xiaochun was like a burning lamp within the dark void, dazzling to the extreme. At that point, he opened his eyes, and excitedly checked his Daoseed, which now had a tiny sprout sticking out of it. I've mastered the former will. My Daoseed has sprouted. Mid-celestial realm. As soon as the sprout appeared, powerful fluctuations rolled out, filling Bai Xiaochun and causing cracking sounds to ring out as they passed. He even grew slightly taller, and began to emanate a strange aura. It was none other than the aura of willpower. Before, that aura had been hidden within his Daoseed, but now that his Daoseed had sprouted, it was released into the open. Bai Xiaochun was now able to affect the world around him on a fundamental level. He could even influence the emotions of people around him. It was an unfathomable level of power. And there was more to it. In addition to the changes in willpower, his cultivation base improvement meant that his battle prowess was now roughly 10 times greater than before. Before, Bai Xiaochun could use the Great Sword of the North to fight someone in the mid-celestial realm, and perhaps hold his own against the late celestial realm. But now, he could do the same thing without the Great Sword of the North. And if he did use the sword, he would definitely occupy the peak level among cultivators in the mid-celestial realm. As Bai Xiaochun analyzed his cultivation base fluctuations, and tested his new control of willpower, he could see how different he was from before, and his heart swelled with excitement. He also knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that, without the events in Merknine County, this breakthrough would have taken much longer, and would have required more resources. Perhaps even saving up for 100 years would not have been enough. The damaged fan also played into it. As for the former will of his time immemorial codex, normally speaking, he would have had to wait until passing the 100th level and becoming the true owner of the damaged fan before breaking through. And unfortunately, an early celestial realm cultivation base could only get him to the 50th level. But now, everything had changed. My next cultivation base breakthrough will also come much more quickly. It might even come after I pass the 100th level. Then I'll be in the late celestial realm, or perhaps even the Great Circle. Having reached this point in his train of thought, his eyebrows danced up and down in delight. He almost didn't dare to think of how wonderful that future development would be. If I can ever become the true owner of the damaged fan, and reach the great circle of the celestial realm, then, with the fan and the great sword of the north, I could theoretically smash Archeans. He simply couldn't stop himself from thinking about how it was possible for him to be incredibly powerful without even being an Archean. After a bit of time passed, he managed to bury such thoughts in his heart. After all, daydreaming about such things now would do little good. Thanks to the good fortune I came across, my former will is in the Great Circle. Since I'm already in the mid-celestial realm, I need to work on the second level of my time immemorial codex, which will eventually get me to the late celestial realm. The first level of the time immemorial codex is the former will, which is perfect for the sprouting of the Deoseed. For the second level, I need to get the Deoseed to bloom. Everything up to this point was for the former will, but now that the Deoseed has sprouted, the time has come for the present will. Of course, Bai Xiaochun knew that when it came to creating new techniques, there had to be a basis. For example, his former will was based on his memories and experiences in the Heavenspan realm. Now he was working on the second level of the time immemorial codex. Unfortunately, his cultivation base breakthrough had come earlier than expected, and therefore, he didn't have the proper foundation to work on a new technique. Eyes glittering, he slapped his bag of holding and brought out one of the rewards for the 50th level, the bamboo slip. But I have this, he murmured. Originally, he had never intended to become the true successor of the sovereign from the immortal world by acquiring his Tao essence. He had hoped to learn from it to forge his own path. If the bamboo slip had contained the full Tao essence of life and death, he could only have acquired it with enlightenment, and plenty more power than he currently had. But considering that it was only a portion of it, he felt much more comfortable trying. Taking a deep breath, he relaxed, then sent some divine sense into the two magical symbols carved onto the bamboo slip. Instantly, the powerful aura of death once again appeared. Then, when his divine sense reached the second magical symbol, a sensation of flourishing vitality also came into being. This convergence between life and death was Bai Xiaochun's first experience with Tao essences. As he sank into the feeling, he lost track of time, and forgot where he was. The only thing he didn't forget were his thoughts regarding the present will. He remained in that state for an unknown period of time, seeking enlightenment. At one point, unbeknownst to him, the spirit automaton appeared out of thin air. The boy glared at Bai Xiaochun, feeling extremely helpless. After all, as the spirit automaton of the damaged fan, he could interfere with things in the levels, but was completely powerless to do anything to Bai Xiaochun in his current position. He had been thwarted over and over again inside of the levels, something that nearly drove him mad every time he thought about it. He could punish trial takers, but Bai Xiaochun had already taken control over a portion of the damaged fan. Therefore the spirit automaton was helpless to do anything to him, and in fact, was already forced to consider him his master to some extent. It didn't matter that he didn't like the arrangement. And it was even worse now that Bai Xiaochun had passed the 50th level, putting him on almost equal footing. What if things keep going like this? What am I supposed to do? The spirit automaton really felt like crying. The mere thought of this shameless cheater becoming his master was a horror. He also started wondering what he would say if he was asked to reveal his name. After all, he had already sworn an oath to adopt the same surname as Bai Xiaochun if he passed that one certain level. He let out a sigh, then gritted his teeth and looked closer at Bai Xiaochun. After a moment, he blinked a few times, and then raised his eyebrows in delight. Ha ha ha, what a fool. Is he actually trying to gain enlightenment of the Tao of time? Using the Tao essence of life and death to be enlightened regarding time? He's dead. It's settled. What he's trying to do is impossible. The Tao of time is one of the most powerful Taos there is. It can even control life and death. What a fool. Ha ha ha. Clapping his hands in delight, he looked closer to confirm that his analysis was correct, then snorted coldly and left in extremely high spirits. To him, it was like the clouds had parted and the sun was now shining down brightly upon him. A month later, Bai Xiaochun was still sitting there, cross-legged and unmoving. At one point, a tremor passed through him, and the bamboo slip which contained the Tao essence of life and death dissolved into ashes. Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes and looked around, and as the air around him rippled and distorted, fluctuations began to roll out that were very different from his former will. Because of those fluctuations, any place where he existed, no matter how ancient it might be, could be affected by his will to stand in place in the stream of time, and exist eternally in the present. It was as if the passage of time simply couldn't affect him at all. To some extent, his willpower could cause time to stop. The present will, he murmured. So domineering. Meanwhile, the spirit automaton yet again stepped out into the open, albeit in a way that Bai Xiaochun couldn't see. When he sensed the fluctuations of the Tao essence of life and death, and then saw Bai Xiaochun, his eyes almost plopped down onto the ground. The Tao of time? Heavens! That exists on a higher level than the Tao essence of life and death. A great Tao. How could a shameless cheater like that gain enlightenment of it? Are you blind, God? The spirit automaton was really descending into madness. Howling defiantly in his heart, and his eyes crimson, he decided that he would pay any price to defeat this shameless individual. You just wait, he muttered, tugging at his hair in frustration. Then he went to find the perfect level to tweak, looking very much like a defeated gambler dead set on making a comeback. Although Bai Xiaochun had a certain level of control over the damaged fan, he had never surpassed the spirit automaton in that regard. Because of that, he was never able to see him. But now that he had passed the 50th level, and also risen to the mid-celestial realm, his senses were more acute. Although he still couldn't see the spirit automaton, he could sense him. All of a sudden, he looked over toward the fan rib where the spirit automaton was actually standing. The boy noticed this, and stepped back in shock, then vanished. Bai Xiaochun narrowed his eyes, and then gave a soft snort. That was definitely the spirit automaton spying on me. The thing must have mental problems or something. Otherwise, why would he be so into peeping on people? Muttering to himself a bit, he looked away and focused his attention on the benefits he had achieved during this session of enlightenment. The Tao essences of sovereign cultivators sure live up to their reputation. This is only a scrap of one, and yet I was able to use it to fuel the auguries of my present will. It even contains some of the meaning of life and death within it. This is my second powerful divine ability, the Sutra of present life and death. Taking a deep breath, he rose to his feet and waved his right hand, causing the air around him to distort and tear. It even seemed as if the surrounding void were rippling in his direction. At the same time, an enormous stone gate appeared behind him, black in color and awe-inspiring in appearance. Countless carvings of vicious ghosts covered its surface, as well as a marionette that was clearly the very same strange entity Bai Xiaochun had seen in Merknine County. There was also the head of a dead old man carved right in the middle of the gate. Considering the profound aura of death that this gate emanated, it obviously represented death. This was none other than the gate of death. The evil ghosts that festooned it were various terrifying ghostly creatures that Bai Xiaochun had encountered throughout his life. As for the face of the old man, he had been formed by the Tao essence of life and death, and was the ultimate representation of death. Next, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered as he waved his right index finger in the direction of the fan ribs, and the spot where he was certain the spirit automaton had been spying on him. Instantly, a second stone gate appeared in that very spot. This gate was white, and was festooned with all sorts of plants and vegetation that Bai Xiaochun had seen in his life, which represented life force, vitality, and that which flourishes. In the middle of the white gate was a carving of the face of a newborn child. Anyone who looked at that face would suddenly hear the cry of a baby. This gate was the gate of life. Bai Xiaochun's Sutra of present life and death created two stone gates, one for death, and one for life. He would stand in front of the gate of death, and would force his opponents to approach him from the direction of the gate of life. Their approach to him signified their approach to death, in which they grew weaker with every step. Because it also contained the Tao of time, it was even more powerful. Anyone who approached him from the gate of life would grow older and older, just like a sun descending into evening. The power to arbitrarily push someone from life toward death was immense. Even Bai Xiaochun was shocked by it. And of utmost importance in it all was that Tao essence of life and death which had once belonged to that sovereign of the past. Bai Xiaochun took in a long breath, and probed at his cultivation base power. Then he stuck his chin up, resolving that, in the future, he wouldn't hide his cultivation base from people ever again. When people realize I've achieved a breakthrough, they'll probably guess that I came across some sort of good fortune. But who cares? I'll just tell them I got a bunch of life force from a weird egg sac I ate. After some thought, he decided that this was definitely the best strategy. At this point, he glanced out of the corner of his eye at the gate of life, thought for a moment, then made a beckoning gesture with his finger. Bring it on, he said proudly. The spirit automaton was standing next to the gate of life in the form of a boy, staring hatefully at Bai Xiaochun. Had he possessed the power, he would have killed Bai Xiaochun 1,000, no, 1,000,000 times over already. Unfortunately, he was powerless to do anything. Complete and utter bullying. He growled, trembling physically. This was definitely the most shameless person he had ever met in his entire life, and he had already sworn countless oaths to see him dead. Although Bai Xiaochun couldn't see the spirit automaton, he could sense him standing there. Therefore, he wouldn't even think about challenging the levels. He would wait until the boy was asleep again. Exercising a thought, he vanished from the damaged fan. After he was gone, the spirit automaton let out a howl of rage that echoed from one end of the fan to the other. He very much looked like a child throwing a tantrum as he then proceeded to fly around furiously, screaming about how he was going to destroy Bai Xiaochun. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun materialized in his private chamber in Misty Sea City. The first thing he did was look at the messages from the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King detailing the things that had occurred while he was gone. After scanning the jade slip, he frowned. 7 days ago, the Vile Emperor reassigned Celestial Ghost Mother to Vile Emperor City, and Celestial Deadfall was dispatched to oversee the north. Bai Xiaochun's eyes narrowed as he pondered the matter. For one thing, he would miss Gongsun Wanner. For another thing, he didn't know this Celestial Deadfall. Of course, since there were only 12 Celestials in all of the eternal immortal domains, he had obviously heard of him. The Vile Emperor dynasty had 7 Celestials, and Bai Xiaochun had personally met 5 of them. Other than Gongsun Wanner and Taoist Heavenspan, there were Celestial Virapaksa, Prince Demon, and Reverend Devourer. According to the Jade Slip, with Gongsun Wanner having departed, the spirit enhancement trade in the northern prefectures was temporarily suspended. The Grand Heaven Master had responded cautiously to this development. Instead of going to try to handle it personally, he made contact with one of the demigods from the Vile Emperor dynasty and arranged for a message of goodwill to be sent to Celestial Deadfall, as well as some introductory gifts. They were still waiting to hear back. According to the Grand Heaven Master's analysis, it was possible that Gongsun Wanner's departure could actually be a good thing. Perhaps she could help to spread word of the spirit enhancement trade to the other immortal domains of the Vile Emperor dynasty, and increase the reputation of Misty Sea Prefecture. After finishing with the reports, Bai Xiaochun realized that there was no new information about Merknine County. Overall, the second immortal domain had been very peaceful and quiet. Apparently, the incident in Merknine County had been a coincidence, but Bai Xiaochun still felt uneasy about it all. He knew that whatever entity had stretched its red-scaled hand out of the egg sac possessed power which could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, power that Celestials couldn't defend against. Although absorbing some of the thing's life force had obviously caused some problems for it, such problems could likely be resolved eventually. Muttering to himself, he rose to his feet with the intention of performing a quick inspection of Misty Sea Prefecture. However, that was when some divine sense from the Grand Heaven Master shot over. Clearly, he was very anxious about something. Not wasting words, the Grand Heaven Master said, "Exalted Celestial, I have important news. Celestial Deadfall bears extreme animosity toward the people of Heavenspan. The demigod who helped me send him a message of goodwill was immediately imprisoned. And 2 hours ago, Celestial Deadfall issued orders that anyone from the Heavenspan realm found in his territory was to be arrested. Most of the people who were arrested were employees of the stores we opened there. Even worse is that, apparently, he is having them all sent further into the Vile Emperor dynasty to give as a tribute to the Vile Prince, to aid in his research of the secrets of spirit enhancement. If my analysis is correct, there is more to the situation than that. We can probably expend a bit of wealth to resolve the situation, but you'll definitely need to take the lead." Even as the Grand Heaven Master's words echoed in Bai Xiaochun's ears via divine sense, the man was flying over to meet him in person. As for Bai Xiaochun, he looked in the direction of the north. Extortion? After probing his own cultivation base, he sent some divine sense over to the incoming Grand Heaven Master. "What's his cultivation base?" "Early Celestial Realm," was the reply. "You're sure about that?" "Absolutely. I've already prepared the necessary gifts to give him." "Exalted Celestial, you." However, before he could say anything else, Bai Xiaochun's eyes tightened into a glare. "Gifts? Yeah, right. This Celestial Deadfall is certainly full of himself, isn't he?" Energy surging, he flew off toward the north. "Deadfall, you fool. You only have a trifling early Celestial Realm cultivation base, and yet you dare to cause problems for me?" Snorting coldly, Bai Xiaochun shot northward in a beam of prismatic light. Back in Misty Sea City, the Grand Heaven Master, the Giant Ghost King and Zhou Yixing emerged only in time to see him disappearing off into the distance. All of them exchanged awkward glances. Was that our Celestial?" Zhou Yixing asked. "Bai Xiaochun?" He truly could not remember a time when he had seen Bai Xiaochun act in a domineering fashion like this. The Giant Ghost King looked equally suspicious, and actually knew more about him than most. For example, back in the Ghost King Orchid incident, Bai Xiaochun had seemed like he would have done anything to avoid going to the trial by fire. Back then, the giant Ghost King had assumed Bai Xiaochun had been trying to fish for greater rewards before going. Only later did he realize that Bai Xiaochun was just simply petrified of death. If there was even a hint of danger involved in some activity, he would refuse to participate. In most situations, he would only go into danger as a last resort. In this situation, Celestial Deadfall's actions were a bit excessive, but it wasn't as if the situation couldn't be resolved. There wasn't necessarily a need to resort to violence. Therefore, the giant Ghost King was truly confused about what was going on. The Grand Heaven Master was equally befuddled. The three of them exchanged another glance, and clearly, all of them felt that Bai Xiaochun was acting strange. The Grand Heaven Master was usually a quick thinker, but not even he was sure about what was happening. After a bit of time passed, the giant Ghost King, who of course was Bai Xiaochun's father-in-law, and understood him the best, slapped his thigh. I know. Bai Xiaochun achieved a cultivation base breakthrough. His aura was much stronger than before. He must have acquired some sort of good fortune that he took advantage of in his latest session of meditation. The process of going from extreme obesity back to his normal self actually improved his cultivation base. Both Zhou Yixing and the Grand Heaven Master seemed surprised by this, but after some thought, they realized that it explained everything. If that's true, then given Bai Xiaochun's personality, both Zhou Yixing and the Grand Heaven Master weren't sure whether to laugh or cry. Even as they sighed awkwardly, Bai Xiaochun was flying through the air feeling very pleased with himself. He accelerated with every moment that passed, surging with confidence, as well as the desire to do battle. He had been waiting for this day for some time. Before, when he was in the early celestial realm, he had always been forced to slink around with his tail between his legs, and rely on the great sword of the north to make himself seem threatening. But now that he had broken through to the mid-celestial realm, he would still need to be cautious in general, but was not worried at all about someone in the early celestial realm. After all, with the great sword of the north on his side, it would be like a Foundation establishment expert fighting a chi condensation cultivator. From a distance, he looked like a shooting star piercing through the sky, causing rumbling sounds to fill heaven and earth. The ground even quaked because of his passage, and sonic booms echoed out ceaselessly. Furthermore, his passage caused the clouds to seethe and wrap around him almost like a cloak. It was a cloak that ran 5,000 kilometers from end to end and obscured the pre-evening light, creating something like a huge shadow. Down below, the northern cultivators were all shocked by what they saw. Regardless of the level of their cultivation base, even experts in the great circle of the demigod realm all gasped and looked up. It's King Heavenspan. Heavens! What's happening? Don't tell me war is breaking out. It must be those orders from Celestial Deadfall to arrest all of the people of Heavenspan. King Heavenspan must be here with deadly intentions. As countless gasps could be heard down below, Bai Xiaochun accelerated, passing mountain ranges and plains until he was closing in on the largest city in this region. Celestial Deadfall's official mansion was very different from Gongsun Wanner's temporary palace of operations. It was an enormous statue of a fierce avian beast with widespread wings and glaring eyes. The creature's mouth was open, making it seem almost like it was letting out a heaven-shaking cry. Different Celestials had different blessed lands that they called their own, and when they were assigned to oversee a specific area, they would often move their blessed land to the new location by means of magical techniques. Celestial Deadfall was currently seated cross-legged in his blessed land. He looked middle-aged, which meant that he looked younger than the average Celestial. However, the willpower fluctuations rolling off of him were by no means weak. Even though he was only in the early celestial realm, he was still an outstanding and powerful individual, roughly equivalent to Ghost Mother. He was skinny, with a long, hooked nose and very thin lips. He was clearly a harsh individual, his expression gloomy and cold. As soon as he sensed Bai Xiaochun arriving, his eyes snapped open, revealing bright blue eyes. There was something about his blue eyes that made him seem particularly dashing, the type who would immediately attract the gazes of any females in the area. What's with the hysterics? He growled. Snorting coldly, he prepared to rise to his feet when, all of a sudden, a thunderous voice filled the air. Deadfall, you fool, how dare you try to extort me? Bai Xiaochun was still a great distance away, but his voice still slammed into the enormous avian statue belonging to Celestial Deadfall. At that point, Bai Xiaochun accelerated to a speed 10 times greater than before. In the past, Bai Xiaochun had clearly been in the early celestial realm. But now, he went all out with his mid-celestial realm cultivation base. It only took a short moment for him to be right there at Celestial Deadfall's blessed land. The instant he arrived, he reached out with his right hand and slapped the statue. A huge boom echoed out, filling all the lands around it. Shockingly, many cultivators in the second immortal domain subconsciously reached out with their own right hands and mimicked Bai Xiaochun's movement. This was none other than willpower magic. Bai Xiaochun might not seem like much when he chose to hold back. But now that he was making a move, he immediately used his willpower. As a result, an enormous hand appeared in the sky, which rumbled toward the statue and immediately crushed all of its powerful defensive magics and other protections, causing it to start to fall to pieces. Shock gripped the mind of Celestial Deadfall, who let out an angry shout as he unleashed the power of his early Celestial Realm cultivation base. When Bai Xiaochun saw that he was preparing to fight back, he snorted coldly. There was no way he was going to give the man a chance to start a true fight. He would crush him right from the beginning. Just as Celestial Deadfall prepared to shoot out from the crumbling statue, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, producing the Great Sword of the North. Blue light shone off of it in scintillating fashion, along with the powerful ripples of a world treasure. Not hesitating for a moment, he slashed the sword at the statue. Deadfall, ya punk, you've got real guts to go and provoke me. Bai Xiaochun was particularly proud of these words, and felt them to be quite impressive. Meanwhile, the huge sword was now descending onto the statue. The statue, which had been in the middle of crumbling, suddenly exploded, sending fragments and rubble out in all directions to reveal the shocked Celestial Deadfall, right in the middle of it all. His hair was disheveled, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. His hands were splayed out in front of him, and he thrummed with the willpower he had just used to defend himself. The expression of shock on his face was almost impossible to describe. Mid-celestial realm? How is this possible? Do you know what you've done wrong, Deadfall? Bai Xiaochun said, his voice echoing like heavenly thunder as he hovered there in midair, energy surging in dramatic fashion. Celestial Deadfall's blessed land was located in the exact center of the capital city of this prefecture, and Bai Xiaochun had controlled his attack perfectly, limiting its destructive effects to the statue itself. None of the rest of the city was affected. Of course, all of the numerous cultivators from the Vile Emperor dynasty who occupied the area were looking over in utter shock. Bai Xiaochun was of the impression that he must look quite awe-inspiring. However, Celestial Deadfall was extremely enraged, and with a howl, prepared to attempt to slip free from the power of the Great Sword of the North. Bai Xiaochun snorted. Performing an incantation gesture with his right hand, he tripled the might of the Great Sword of the North. As he did, the 300-meter-long sword slowly began to inch down toward Celestial Deadfall's head. As a result of this process, the lands quaked, and Celestial Deadfall struggled mightily. He looked like his body might collapse at any moment, blood sprayed out of his mouth constantly, and crevices snaked out in the ground around his feet, which seemed just on the verge of crumbling into a crater. The pressure from the great sword was so intense that he wasn't sure he could handle it. And he could tell that the slightest misstep on his part would lead to the sword cleaving him in two. Being in the mid-celestial realm, Bai Xiaochun could actually handle Celestial Deadfall on his own. And yet, he was using the Great Sword of the North. Therefore, he wasn't just handling him, he was crushing him. I'll ask you one more time, Deadfall, he said, his voice as cold as ice, as were his gleaming eyes. Do you know what you've done wrong? I refuse to believe that you would ever dare to kill me, Bai Xiaochun. Celestial Deadfall shouted, his face crimson with rage. It wasn't that he didn't want to make his escape. The truth was that the one-fist strike backed with some willpower had been enough to both destroy his blessed land, and also seal him tight. The only way he would possibly be able to get out of this situation was if his cultivation base were higher. And yet, he refused to back down. He really didn't believe that Bai Xiaochun would kill him. Not only would Celestial Deadfall be resurrected if that happened, but the tensions and friction between the Vile Emperor dynasty and Saint Emperor dynasty would be affected. Even the most unreasonable person would have to take that into consideration. I wouldn't dare, Bai Xiaochun said. Suddenly, he chuckled coldly. I guess you've forgotten who I am. Screw it, let's see if I would dare to kill you. His aura surged as he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then waved his finger at the Great Sword of the North, his killing intent boiling. In response, the Great Sword of the North began to vibrate, bolstered by Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base to release a powerful sword chi that was clearly enough to slaughter anyone in the early celestial realm. Celestial Deadfall began to shiver. He had already been pushed to his limit, so when this sword chi appeared, his 5 yin organs and 6 yang organs trembled painfully. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as the Great Sword of the North which hung above him increased in size to 3,000 meters, and began to radiate the might of the world itself. Then, it started to chop down toward him. Considering the speed with which it moved, this was clearly intended to be a fatal blow. Bai Xiaochun, you. Even as he spoke, a halo of 7-colored light spread out from him, which transformed into a 7-colored dragon that rushed, howling, toward the greatsword. At the same time, a host of magical items flew out of Celestial Deadfall's bag of holding, creating a powerful defensive barrier. And things weren't over yet. He even used a trump card. Blue veins bulged out on his face and neck as an enormous black bull materialized behind him. Radiating shocking devil chi, the bull bellowed and slammed its head into the sword. This was Celestial Deadfall's life-saving divine ability, Devil Bull Shakes the Heavens. Although this trump card was easy to describe, it was very difficult to employ, and was severely draining. Even though he was in the early Celestial realm, it was almost too much for Celestial Deadfall to take, much less considering that his willpower magic and cultivation base were restricted. However, there wasn't time to worry about those things, he had to go all out with everything he had at his disposal. Rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth as the breathless audience looked on. First, the 7-colored dragon slammed into the greatsword, only to be slashed to pieces instantly. Then came the magical items, which were equally as useless. A series of booms rang out as the greatsword of the north destroyed everything in its path, and then prepared to meet the Black Devil Bull. At that point, the sword paused for the briefest of moments. Then, Bai Xiaochun snorted and sent more cultivation base power out, causing the sword to slice completely through the Devil Bull, and continue towards Celestial Deadfall. The gap between these two Celestials was just too vast. No matter what Celestial Deadfall did to resist the battle prowess being used against him, he was like a mantis trying to stop a war chariot. Popping sounds rang out as any magical items he threw out were destroyed, and any divine abilities he unleashed were shattered. As he looked up at the greatsword of the north, his heart finally began to pound with shock. Damn it, he's from the Heavenspan realm, not the Saint Emperor dynasty. He's gonna kill me. He's really gonna kill me. He actually wants the Vile Emperor dynasty and the Saint Emperor dynasty to go to war. All of a sudden, Celestial Deadfall felt a sense of impending crisis. He knew the Vile Emperor could resurrect him with his Deoseed if he died, but at the same time, he was well aware that such a thing would result in a permanent drop in battle prowess. It would also affect his future cultivation in a majorly negative way. Therefore, if he had any other option than dying, he would pick it. When he realized how much of a lunatic Bai Xiaochun was, fear began to grip his heart, and he suddenly regretted his attempt to extort him. As he raced to come up with a solution, the greatsword got closer and closer, and the sensation of imminent fatal crisis grew stronger. A long line of blood even appeared on his forehead, as though he might be cut in two. Gritting his teeth, he finally said, "Just take your people with you and go, Bai Xiaochun." Although it was not a direct admission of guilt, in some ways, it was. But that was not what Bai Xiaochun was looking for. He had come here to put on a display of might, and make sure that everyone knew two things. First, he was no longer in the early celestial realm, and second, that if someone offended him deeply enough, he was the type of crazy person who would kill them because of it. On the other hand, he was also aware that he shouldn't actually cut down a celestial unless it was absolutely necessary. If he did something that drastic, the Saint Emperor would surely step in and seize Misty Sea Prefecture as punishment, or at least take control of it. Bai Xiaochun didn't want to give him that chance. And yet, he also didn't want to let Celestial Dead fall off scot-free. Therefore, despite the words of concession he had uttered, Bai Xiaochun's eyes merely flickered, and his murderous aura flared as he pushed the sword downward. Maybe I can't kill you, he thought, but I can scare you half to death. Bai Xiaochun's facial expression, his actions, and his killing intent, all seemed completely and utterly realistic, to the point where Celestial Deadfall's heart started pounding even harder. Damn it, I already agreed to let them go. He had his cultivation base rotating at full power, but the rift on his head only continued to grow wider and longer. Knowing that his body was about to be destroyed, he gritted his teeth. I know what I did wrong. Despite the words that came out of his mouth, Bai Xiaochun's eyes remained as cold as ever, and his sword didn't change direction or momentum. Celestial Deadfall's head began to split open, provoking a scream of pain and frustration. There's no grudge between us, Bai Xiaochun. By this point, he was absolutely convinced that Bai Xiaochun was a lunatic, and that there was no hope of escaping his situation. However, in that very moment of despair, Bai Xiaochun twisted the great sword of the north to the side. Instead of slicing Celestial Deadfall's head in half, it chopped down toward his right shoulder, cutting his arm off. Blood sprayed everywhere as Celestial Deadfall let out a muffled grunt. The blast of energy sent him tumbling backward, blood spraying everywhere. When he came to a stop, he looked up at Bai Xiaochun, resentment flickering in his eyes, but more so, relief at having survived. And then he saw the murderous look that still existed in Bai Xiaochun's eyes, and his heart pounded even harder. Lucky for you I changed my mind, Bai Xiaochun growled. Now get the hell out of here while you can. If you want a second round, come find me in Misty Sea Prefecture. I'll be waiting. Waving his finger, he caused the great sword of the north to shrink back down and fly toward him. When he grabbed it by the hilt, the tip vibrated and released an intense humming sound. Celestial Deadfall sighed inwardly at how unlucky he had been. No one would ever want to provoke a psycho like this. It wasn't worth it. Now, he was in very bad shape, and had lost a lot of face. The only way he could comfort himself was to remind himself that his opponent was in the mid-celestial realm. Without another word, he grabbed his severed arm, turned, and became a bright beam of light that shot off into the distance. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.